you've opened up the exercise for the second iceberg diagram, we're going to draw it in a slightly different way. We're going to use different multimedia elements to create a more creative version of this same diagram. Now, on this slide at the moment, there really is nothing there because, once again, we need to draw it all. But there is a little bit of content off to the side. Again, we'll put this back once we finish the rest of the slide. Now, unlike the previous iceberg diagram, we're actually not going to start with drawing the iceberg first. We'll put the background in there in just a second, but actually the first thing we need to draw is the ocean, and then we need to animate it. But let's go ahead and put in the background first. So, right-click on this slide and just format background. And we'll go to Picture or Texture Fill. Again, once again, don't worry about the default fill that pops in, which is usually this pattern. We'll just make our way to the picture source, insert from a file. And in this case, we're going to insert this desert picture, which you've downloaded already for this exercise. Okay, so now we have our picture in place. What we need to draw next is really just the ocean. And we're going to use a pretty standard shape to draw this. So if you go to Insert and go to Shapes, and we'll just scroll down a little bit to Stars and Banners. So within that section there, we have a shape called a double wave. So that's the one we're going to go ahead and use. Now, when we draw this, we don't need the Shift key. We will need to touch side to side on the actual slide. But as you draw it, start from just above the halfway point. As I said, draw it from side to side. But you will need to draw this so it goes below the slide. If we don't do that, obviously, as you see on the slide itself, we'll have a little bit of the background picture remaining. So just drag that so it goes below the surface of that slide. Okay, so there is our ocean. Now, the waves in this particular shape is a little bit too harsh, and this is not meant to depict kind of stormy seas. We want a very gentle wave in this one. So I'm just going to use the edit point on the top left-hand side and just reduce the level of those waves. So they're a little bit gentler in their flow there. Okay, so now we need to just color it. So we're going to bring up our Format Shape box. I'm just going to undock mine so you can see what we're doing here. And once again, I'm going to go to Gradient Fill. Now, again, I'm not worried about type or direction just yet, but in this case, I'm going to actually use 3 colors rather than my usual 2. So again, if you have this by default, there's 4 colors there on the color bar, just remove one of them and just always just double check just to make sure you have 3 stops or 3 colors there. And in this case, we do. So the very first stop, so if I go to stop 1 of 3, I'm going to push this all the way to the left-hand side. Now, in terms of color, I want it to match kind of the sky color, but I'm not going to aim it for the exact same color as the horizon level here. Otherwise, we won't actually be able to see the top of our waves. So the best way to do this, first of all, is when we go to color, we're going to use eyedropper. And rather than sort of picking a color which is very close to the actual shape, as I said, you wouldn't be able to see the top of it. I'm going to kind of just nudge it up a little bit until we kind of get this kind of lavender color. So it's a kind of mix between that pink and the blue color. And I will click on this one, and that will give us this kind of color here. So there's a bit of variation from the sky and just the top of the ocean. Now, stop 2 of 3. I'll just nudge that up to roughly around maybe about the 20% position, somewhere near there. Now, for this color, I'm just going to use standard colors. So I'll go to color and I'm going to use standard light blue. And stop 3 of 3. I'm going to use the standard color for blue. So I'll just use the standard blue color. And essentially that is my wave done. The only thing I really need to do now is just remove any of those shape outlines. So I'll just select no line. Now, of course, you have the opportunity to kind of mix and match those colors a little bit if you want to play around with those. Definitely feel free to do that, or maybe incorporate some of your brand colors as well. Okay, so if that's the ocean done, what we need to do is actually make that ocean move. So we do need to animate it. So I'm going to close the Format Shape box first, and I'm just going to reduce the screen size a little bit. First thing I'm going to do is very much like we will do in many other exercises when we want to create this kind of looping background or foreground. So the first thing I need to do is duplicate this wave here. So Control and D to duplicate that wave shape. And then we're going to stick it so it's attached to the previous one. So we just want to attach this here, just like this. And I'll just nudge it in with the cursor keys. And that looks pretty good. So all we're going to do is use the Shift key to help us select both of those shapes. And now we're going to group them. Fantastic. So now those two shapes are grouped together, we can now animate it. And essentially what the animation is going to do is it brings one shape off the slide, the other shape is coming onto the slide. And this kind of repetition will create this kind of looped movement. So what animation are we going to use? Well, motion paths, because motion paths are really the best form of animation for these kind of things. Now you can use entrance and exit effects, but a motion path is just a lot easier. So let's go to Animations tab and go to Add Animation. In just a moment, I'm going to bring up Animation Pane first because we will need to get to this. And just as a little side note there, for your content on the side of the slide, I have left a default animation, but you don't have to keep with that. You can apply your own or any other type of animation. So maybe I'll just get rid of it for the time being and allow you guys later on to put any animation that you may want there. So let's just deal with the wave first of all. So let's click back on the wave shape. We'll go to Add Animation and we'll scroll past Entrance, Emphasis and Exit and make our way to Motion Paths. And as I said before, 99% of the time we'll only ever need lines. So just click Motion Path Lines. You'll get a little preview, but just ignore that kind of preview for the time being. As you can see, the default direction is going down. We want as going towards the left. So very quickly go to Effect Options and just select Left. Now again, ignore the preview, but the biggest problem we have is the length of that motion path is just not long enough. Now, if you're not sure how long it needs to be, well, it needs to be the length of one of these shapes, which is pretty easy to understand because it's from side to side or the width of the slide. That simply means then that for this motion path, its stopping point or the red circle you see on the motion path will just be at the end of the slide wall here. So very carefully, just hover your cursor above the red stopping point and you'll know you've done it because you can see the two white arrowheads of the motion path. Now, if you want to keep a straight line, you can hold down the Shift key and that will help you. So holding down the Shift key, I'm just going to stretch that red point to the end of the slide wall there. And that's it. It's the perfect length. Now, we still haven't finished because we still need to modify the motion path a little bit. So in your animation pane, just double click the animation. So we're just going to double click this portion here. And this will bring up the animation box. Now, all we need to do is remove any smooth start and smooth end because we don't need any of that sort of inertia to the animation. So we don't need it to build up speed, move constantly and slow down. So just reduce those all to 0. Definitely do not select auto reverse. Just leave that as it is. We just want a continuous repetition of this loop. So go to timing. Start will be with previous because we want it to start automatically. The duration for this one, we're going to make it very slow. So I'm just going to pick 20 seconds and repeat until end of slide because we want this wave to keep going over and over. So start with previous, duration is 20 seconds, repeat until end of slide, click OK, and that one's taken care of. If you want to go to slideshow to have a look at it, to see what it really looks like, which is my advice for most of your animations that you do, don't just look at preview because sometimes preview is not what you get in the final slide. Always go to slideshow to see what it really looks like. And as you can see, our wave looks okay. So what's the next one we need to put in? Well, the next part is actually quite easy. It's just the iceberg itself. Unlike the previous exercises where we had to draw it with shapes and gradient colors, we're just going to use a 3D model. So if we go to Insert and go to 3D Models, now unfortunately you're not going to find too many iceberg models as stock models from Microsoft. So this one is actually one that I provided for you, and you probably downloaded as part of this exercise. So in this case, when we go to 3D models, just go to this device and just select the Impress Iceberg. And I'll zoom in so you guys can see it. And so there's my Impress Iceberg. We can move that around, as you can see, using the gyroscope icon in the middle. But the iceberg does need to be a bit bigger, so we're just going to make that a little bit bigger. But remember, when you position your iceberg, just remember about 2/3 of that iceberg should be below the surface, i.e. that is the concept that this really entails, where there are hidden dangers and hidden challenges. So we don't see too much above the surface there. Now, one problem that we do have is just by placing the iceberg there, we don't get that same color contrast to separate the surface versus what's underneath the ocean. And we can't use gradient colors or shape colors on this 3D model. So the way that we're going to do it is we're going to reuse the ocean shape we've just drawn. So let me zoom out just a little bit and click on the ocean. Now we need to duplicate this. So we're going to Control D to duplicate. And of course, this will duplicate the animation as well. But we do need to just position that so it's right on top of the previous ocean. There it is. And we can tell we've done it by looking at the smart grids that pop up. Now, how does that make it look like we can see underneath? Well, we're going to need to change some of the gradient colors, i.e. place some transparency inside of them. And so now that we have this shape on top, very carefully within the group section, click into one of those shapes. And if we want to click into the other shape, hold down the Shift key and then very carefully click into the other shape, all at the same time, not ungrouping it. So with those two shapes now selected, we can open up our Format Shape box once again. And all we're going to do is just modify a little bit of the color transparency. Now, which one do we do it on? Well, in fact, we only need to do it on stop 2 of 3. So let me make my way to stop 2 of 3, which is this light blue color. So I'll click on this one. And all I'm going to do is add a little bit of transparency. So I'll just move it here so you can see what happens here. And as I move up the transparency, you'll be able to see that we can see through a little bit and see the bottom part of that iceberg. We don't want to increase the transparency too much because we want to maintain those kind of color contrasts between the surface and below the ocean. And so I've maybe put mine around sort of 50 or 60%. It doesn't have to be super accurate there, but as long as you can see it and there's some color contrast. And I'm happy with this one. I'm not going to change any other settings for any other colors. And so I'm now going to close my Format Shape box. Now, I do want to animate my iceberg because at the moment it's very static and my ocean is flowing. I want my iceberg to kind of twist as it follows the flow of the ocean. And this is quite straightforward as well. So click on your iceberg for me and go to Animations. And we can see the 2 animations already there, which are for our ocean. Now, if we click Add Animation, if we're clicked on the iceberg, we have a whole new set of animations which are only available if you insert 3D models. And so on the top row, we have the 3D animations, and we're going to select Turntable. Now, you'll see that little preview of the turntable there. But we're going to modify some of that animation. So where you see the turntable in your animation pane, just double click on it and just a couple of changes that we're going to do. So the only thing I'm going to do for effect is for the rotation axis, I'm going to swap that to Object Center. And I typically do this for most of the animations I would do on 3D models, because if you leave it on View Center, you're going to have a little bit of a wobble or a tilt. So I tend to select Object Center to keep it centered, as the name suggests. So we're also going to get rid of Smooth Start and Smooth End. We don't need any kind of inertia on that. And that's all we need to do for effect. But we do need to change the timing. So we'll go to Timing, and once again, Start will be with Previous. The duration by default is already 20 seconds, and that's okay because that's exactly what we put for our waves. And then Repeat, we just need to change that until end of slide. So start with previous, duration is 20 seconds, and repeat until end of slide. I'll go ahead and click OK, and we'll see a little preview there. Now, I'll see the full thing in slideshow after I've put in the last two elements. So what are the last two elements? Well, we've done one 3D model. Let's insert another 3D model, really to emphasize the dangers and the perils or the unseen challenges which lurk below the surface. And so there's a nice little one I'm going to use, and we may have saw it in the introduction. We're going to use a 3D shark swimming around to highlight the perils of under the surface there. So if you go to Insert and go to 3D Models, in this case, we're actually going to use one of the Microsoft stock models. So we'll go to 3D Stock Models. And in this case, I'm just going to use all the animated models. Now, you probably heard me comment on this on some of the other exercises, that most of the stock models there, they're probably not that suitable for business presentations, but for educational purposes or creative purposes, they may be okay. But there's one or two that we can possibly use. And one of them I found here, which is the shark. So select the very first option, all animated models. And you can see quite a few of them in there. But if we just scroll down a little bit, just make your way until you find the shark. So I'll select this one and we'll click Insert for our shark. Now, the great thing about having some of these pre-animated models from Microsoft, again, if I just move that around. So our shark is swimming, but he's still. I mean, he's not moving in any positions from left to right. Now, the great thing about having some of these pre-animated models is it's not just one animation you have an option for. They give you a few different options. Now, at the moment, because we've inserted this model, we have that 3D model tab open already. But on the left-hand side, we've got scenes. This particular shark comes with 3 scenes. And I already know that we want scene 2. So I'll go ahead and click on that. And it kind of puts our shark in the background. But what I'm really looking for, as we can see, is it's moving around. It's swimming kind of elegantly in the ocean. Now, I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger and pop this in position roughly here. Now, we just need to finish this off because this is the final object we've inserted, but the shark doesn't really look like it's in the ocean. So because of that color contrast. So all we need to do is this. If we click on the duplicate ocean that we did just a moment ago, all we're going to do is bring to front. So we'll bring to front. And because of the transparency that we've already inserted, it will obviously show our shark, but it gives it that same kind of color contrast that we have for our iceberg. And really then for the last bit, I'm just going to add back my content. We will need to bring this to the front. So let me just bring that to the front. And essentially, you can have a look at what it looks like now by going to slideshow. And that is what our creative iceberg now looks like. We've done it slightly differently to the one we did before, where we've used shapes and gradient colors. So we're just using some of the different types of media which is available to us, such as 3D models. And this just gives us more creative choices and options when it comes to drawing these diagrams. And honestly, it's actually a lot quicker and faster just by inserting 3D models rather than having to draw it. Of course, this somewhat depends on what you're trying to achieve, what your brand guidelines and styles may be, but hopefully this has definitely given you a few more options and creative choices when it comes to drawing this iceberg diagram. Well, I hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll definitely look forward to seeing you in the next exercise.